Question 1. An environmental management systems audit program designed to ensure compliance with regulations like the European Union's Industrial Emissions Directive wide and to foster continuous improvement has been in operation for 3 years. The program's performance reporting for the last fiscal year indicates that 150 audits were conducted, resulting in 45 significant nonconformities, 120 minor nonconformities, and 285 conformities. Over the same period, 80% of identified nonconformities had corrective actions initiated within the stipulated timeframe, and 70% of previously identified nonconformities were verified as closed. The audit program's objective is to identify at least 90% of significant deviations from environmental policy and legal requirements. Which of the following best reflects a critical aspect of assessing the audit program's performance in relation to its stated objectives, considering the provided data? Option A. Calculating the total number of nonconformities, significant and minor, and comparing this aggregate figure to the number of audits conducted to gauge overall compliance detection. Option B. Evaluating the trend of significant nonconformities per audit and the proportion of audits that successfully identified at least one significant nonconformity against the program's objective of identifying 90% of deviations. Option C. Analyzing the ratio of conformities to nonconformities across all audits to determine the overall health of the environmental management system, irrespective of the audit program's specific objectives. Option D. Assessing the percentage of corrective actions initiated and closed out, as this directly measures the effectiveness of the audit findings in driving immediate operational changes. Correct answer is B. Evaluating the trend of significant nonconformities per audit and the proportion of audits that successfully identified at least one significant nonconformity against the program's objective of identifying 90% of deviations. Explanation. ISO 14013, 2003 provides guidance on establishing and maintaining audit programs for environmental management systems. When reporting the performance of an audit program, the focus is on demonstrating its effectiveness and efficiency in achieving its objectives. This involves evaluating various aspects such as the scope of audits conducted, the number of findings, conformities and nonconformities, the timeliness of audit completion, and the resources utilized. The overall trend of nonconformities identified over a period, correlated with the number of audits performed, can indicate the program's ability to detect systemic issues and drive improvement. For instance, if the percentage of audits uncovering significant nonconformities increases, it might suggest a more rigorous or effective audit process, or it could signal a decline in the auditee's environmental performance that the program is successfully identifying. Conversely, a consistent low rate of nonconformities across many audits might indicate a mature environmental management system, or, potentially, a less probing audit approach. The reporting should also encompass the achievement of audit schedule adherence, the follow-up on corrective actions, and feedback from auditees and auditors to provide a comprehensive view of the program's operational health and its contribution to the organization's environmental objectives and legal compliance. The ultimate goal of performance reporting is to enable informed decisions about the audit program's future direction, resource allocation, and potential enhancements to its methodology. Question 2. Consider an environmental audit of a manufacturing facility that produces industrial solvents. During the audit, the team leader observes that the facility's hazardous waste manifests, submitted to the relevant state environmental protection agency, in accordance with the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) regulations, indicate a discrepancy between the reported volume of spent solvent sent for off-site treatment and the volume recorded in the facility's internal waste tracking log for the previous quarter. Additionally, an interview with the environmental compliance officer reveals a misunderstanding regarding the classification of a newly introduced solvent mixture. Which of the following approaches best exemplifies the required documentation of audit evidence in this scenario? Adhering to the principles outlined in ISO 14013, 2003 for audit programs. Option A. Documenting the specific manifest numbers, dates, reported volumes, internal log entries, the nature of the discrepancy, and the environmental compliance officer's statement about the solvent classification, referencing the relevant RCRA subpart and the facility's environmental policy. Option B. Summarizing the findings as possible record-keeping issues and training needs, and noting that further investigation is required without specific references to evidence. Option C. Recording a general note about potential manifest inaccuracies and a brief mention of the compliance officer's confusion without detailing specific documents or regulations. Option D. Attaching copies of all internal waste logs and manifest forms to the audit report without providing a narrative explanation of the observed discrepancies or the interview content. The correct answer is A. Documenting the specific manifest numbers, dates, reported volumes, internal log entries, the nature of the discrepancy, and the environmental compliance officer's statement about the solvent classification, referencing the relevant RCRA subpart and the facility's environmental policy. Explanation. The core principle for documenting audit evidence in an environmental audit program, as guided by ISO 14013-2003, is that the evidence must be sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful to support the audit findings and conclusions. Sufficiency refers to the quantity of evidence. Reliability pertains to its accuracy and objectivity. Relevance means it directly relates to the audit criteria, and usefulness implies it can be acted upon. When an auditor observes a nonconformity, such as a discrepancy in waste manifest records compared to actual disposal quantities reported to a regulatory body like the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, under RCRA regulations, the documentation must capture these specifics. This includes noting the exact dates of the manifests, the reported quantities, the actual quantities, the specific waste streams involved, the disposal facility, and the nature of the discrepancy. Furthermore, it requires referencing the specific clause or requirement of the environmental management system or regulation that has been contravened. Witnessing a physical condition, like an uncontained spill of chemicals, necessitates documenting the location, the substance, the volume, the containment measures or lack thereof, and the potential environmental impact. Interviewing personnel should also be documented, noting who was interviewed when, and the substance of their statements, especially if these statements corroborate or contradict other evidence. The audit team leader is responsible for ensuring that all documented evidence is objective, factual, and directly supports the audit conclusions, enabling a clear understanding of the audit's basis and facilitating any subsequent corrective actions or follow-up audits. The goal is to create a clear, traceable record that withstands scrutiny and provides a solid foundation for reporting. Question 3. When developing an environmental audit program specifically for water pollution prevention, as guided by ISO 14013-2003, which of the following elements is most critical for ensuring the program effectively assesses an organization's adherence to stringent regulatory discharge limits and its internal water management policies? Option A. The systematic verification of effluent monitoring data against permit parameters and the evaluation of the operational effectiveness of installed wastewater treatment technologies. Option B. The cataloging of all water-related equipment and the confirmation of their purchase dates according to ISO 14013-2003 guidelines. Option C. The examination of the company's water supply contracts and the analysis of the energy efficiency of water pumping systems. Option D. The assessment of the organization's water consumption reduction targets and the review of employee training records on general environmental awareness. Correct answer is A. The systematic verification of effluent monitoring data against permit parameters and the evaluation of the operational effectiveness of installed wastewater treatment technologies. Explanation. ISO 14013-2003 provides guidance on establishing, implementing, and maintaining audit programs for environmental management systems. When focusing on water pollution prevention, an audit program must consider various aspects to ensure compliance and effectiveness. A key element is the systematic review of an organization's processes that could discharge effluents into water bodies. This includes identifying all potential sources of water pollution, such as process wastewater, cooling water, stormwater runoff, and accidental spills. The audit program should outline the scope, objectives, and methodology for assessing the organization's adherence to relevant legislation, permits, and internal policies related to water quality. Furthermore, it must include provisions for evaluating the effectiveness of pollution control measures, such as wastewater treatment technologies, spill containment systems, and operational procedures. The program should also specify the frequency of audits, the qualifications of auditors, and the reporting and follow-up mechanisms. In the context of water pollution prevention, a robust audit program would prioritize the verification of monitoring data for key parameters like pH, suspended solids, biochemical oxygen demand (BOD), and chemical oxygen demand (COD) against established discharge limits. It would also assess the integrity and maintenance of pollution control equipment and the competency of personnel involved in water management. The program's design should facilitate the identification of nonconformities and the recommendation of corrective actions to enhance the environmental performance of the organization concerning water usage and discharge. Question 4. When developing an environmental audit program in accordance with ISO 14013-2003, which factor most critically dictates the specific objectives and scope of individual audits conducted within that program? Option A. The most recent publicly reported environmental incident involving a competitor organization in the same geographical region. Option B. The number of audit findings identified in the most recently completed internal audit cycle, irrespective of their significance. Option C. The immediate availability of audit personnel with specialized technical expertise in a particular industry sector. Option D. The strategic direction and stated objectives of the organization's environmental management system. The correct answer is D. The strategic direction and stated objectives of the organization's environmental management system. Explanation. The core principle of establishing an audit program under ISO 14013-2003 is to ensure that environmental audits are conducted systematically and effectively to support the organization's environmental policy and objectives. This involves a strategic approach to planning, scheduling, and managing audits over a defined period. The program should be designed to cover all relevant aspects of the environmental management system, EMS, considering the organization's significant environmental aspects, legal and other requirements, and the results of previous audits. The selection of specific audit objectives and scope for individual audits within the program is contingent upon the overall strategic direction of the EMS, the organization's environmental performance, and any identified risks or opportunities. Therefore, the most fundamental driver for determining the specific objectives and scope of an individual audit within a broader audit program is the overarching strategic intent of the environmental management system itself, as it guides the entire audit process and ensures its alignment with organizational goals. This encompasses the organization's commitment to continual improvement and compliance. Question 5. In the context of developing an environmental audit program according to the principles outlined in ISO 14013-2003 guidelines, what is the paramount consideration for internal communication to ensure the program's efficacy and the organization's receptiveness to its findings? Option A. Relying solely on informal verbal updates between department heads to convey audit progress and preliminary findings. Option B. Limiting internal communication to only the audit team to maintain strict confidentiality and prevent external interference. Option C. Establishing a clear and consistent channel for disseminating audit objectives, scope, schedule, and outcomes to all relevant internal personnel and management. Option D. Primarily focusing communication on the technical specifications of environmental controls being audited, with less emphasis on broader organizational impact. Correct answer is C. Establishing a clear and consistent channel for disseminating audit objectives, scope, schedule, and outcomes to all relevant internal personnel and management. Explanation. ISO 14013-2003, while not a standard itself, but rather a guideline for developing audit programs, emphasizes the importance of effective communication throughout the auditing process. When considering the internal communication within an organization for an environmental audit program, the primary goal is to ensure all relevant parties are informed, engaged, and understand their roles and the audit's objectives. This includes informing management about the audit schedule and findings, informing auditees about the scope and expected participation, and facilitating the flow of information between the audit team members. The guideline stresses that communication should be timely, clear, and appropriate for the audience. It also highlights the need for feedback mechanisms to address concerns and clarify misunderstandings. Therefore, the most crucial aspect of internal communication for an audit program is the structured dissemination of information regarding the audit's scope, objectives, schedule, and outcomes to all affected internal stakeholders to ensure a smooth and effective audit process. This structured approach underpins the entire audit program's success and the organization's ability to act on audit findings. Question 6. Considering the development of an environmental audit program according to ISO 14013-2003, which element is most crucial for effectively assessing and prioritizing environmental risks stemming from an organization's operations, particularly in relation to adherence to national environmental statutes like the Clean Air Act or equivalent international regulations? Option A. Comprehensive inventory of all past environmental incidents, irrespective of their severity or regulatory impact. Option B. An in-depth analysis of the organization's supply chain management practices to identify upstream environmental impacts. Option C. A thorough review of the organization's financial statements to identify potential cost savings from environmental compliance. Option D. A detailed mapping of all identified environmental aspects to specific clauses within the organization's Environmental Management System Manual. The correct answer is D. A detailed mapping of all identified environmental aspects to specific clauses within the organization's Environmental Management System Manual. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14013-2003 regarding audit programs is to establish a systematic and objective process for evaluating an organization's environmental management system. When assessing environmental risks within the context of developing an audit program, the focus is on identifying potential areas of non-compliance with legal requirements and the organization's own environmental policy and objectives. This involves understanding the organization's operations, its environmental aspects, and the applicable environmental legislation. For instance, a chemical manufacturing facility would need to consider regulations concerning hazardous waste disposal, air emissions, and water discharge permits. The audit program must then be designed to verify that controls are in place to manage these risks and that compliance is maintained. This requires the auditor to have a thorough understanding of both the organization's processes and the relevant regulatory framework, such as the Clean Water Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) in the United States, or equivalent national legislation. The audit program's design should prioritize areas with higher potential environmental impact or greater regulatory scrutiny. Therefore, a comprehensive understanding of the interplay between operational activities, identified environmental aspects, and the specific legal obligations is paramount for an effective audit program that addresses environmental risk. Question 7. When developing an audit program for a manufacturing facility subject to the European Union's Industrial Emissions Directive, WIDE, what is the primary consideration for determining the specific areas and processes to be included in site inspections, beyond general compliance with the facility's environmental permits? Option A. Selecting inspection sites based on the convenience of access and the availability of personnel during the scheduled audit period. Option B. Inspecting all operational areas with equal depth and frequency, regardless of their environmental significance, to ensure comprehensive coverage. Option C. Prioritizing operational units identified through a preliminary risk assessment as having the highest potential for significant environmental impact or noncompliance with IED Best Available Techniques, BAT, reference documents. Option D. Focusing solely on areas where previous audit findings indicated minor deviations, to ensure consistent follow-up and closure of nonconformities. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing operational units identified through a preliminary risk assessment as having the highest potential for significant environmental impact or noncompliance with IED Best Available Techniques, BAT, reference documents. Explanation. The effectiveness of an environmental audit program, as guided by ISO 14013-2003, hinges on the strategic selection and execution of site inspection. When an audit program is being established or revised, the auditor must consider the specific objectives of the audit, the scope of the environmental management system, and the potential environmental aspects and impacts associated with the audited organization's activities, products, and services. Site inspections are a critical component for gathering direct evidence of the implementation and effectiveness of environmental controls, compliance with relevant legislation, such as the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act, depending on the jurisdiction and the organization's operations, and adherence to the organization's own environmental policies and procedures. The selection of specific areas or processes for inspection should be risk-based, prioritizing those with higher potential for environmental nonconformity or significant impact. This involves understanding the operational flow, identifying critical control points, and considering historical audit findings or reported incidents. The auditor must also plan for the appropriate resources, including personnel with the necessary expertise, time, and equipment, to conduct thorough and objective inspections. The frequency and depth of site inspection should be determined by factors such as the complexity of the operations, the regulatory environment, the organization's environmental performance trends, and the results of previous audits. A well-structured site inspection plan ensures that the audit program effectively verifies the environmental management system's performance and identifies opportunities for improvement. Question 8. Consider a multi-site manufacturing organization undergoing an ISO 14013-2003 compliant environmental audit program. The organization operates facilities in distinct regions with varying local environmental regulations, such as stricter emission limits in one region compared to another, and different reporting requirements to local environmental protection agencies. The audit program aims to assess the effectiveness of the corporate environmental management system and its consistent application across all sites. Which approach to establishing communication protocols would best ensure that site-specific regulatory nuances and the overarching corporate objectives are effectively addressed and communicated throughout the audit process. Option A. Develop a tiered communication framework that segregates corporate-level directives from site-specific operational communications, with designated points of contact at both the corporate and site levels responsible for managing and relaying information according to predefined escalation paths for critical findings. Option B. Establish communication protocols solely based on the corporate environmental policy, without explicit consideration for site-specific regulatory differences or the need for distinct communication flows for different types of audit findings. Option C. Implement a single, centralized communication platform for all audit-related information, requiring all site personnel and corporate management to report updates and findings through this system, regardless of the nature or urgency of the information. Option D. Rely on informal communication channels, such as direct phone calls and emails between individual auditors and site personnel, to manage information flow, assuming that all relevant parties will naturally stay informed. The correct answer is A. Develop a tiered communication framework that segregates corporate-level directives from site-specific operational communications, with designated points of contact at both the corporate and site levels responsible for managing and relaying information according to predefined escalation paths for critical findings. Explanation. The establishment of effective communication protocols within an environmental audit program, as guided by ISO 14013-2003, is paramount for ensuring clarity, efficiency, and the accurate dissemination of information among all stakeholders. This involves defining the channels, frequency, content, and responsibilities for communication throughout the audit lifecycle. Key considerations include identifying the target audience for specific information, such as the audit management, audit team members, and regulatory bodies, and tailoring the communication approach accordingly. For instance, initial audit planning communications might focus on scope and objectives, while interim findings require a more detailed and immediate reporting mechanism. The protocol should also address how feedback will be managed and how corrective actions will be communicated and tracked. A robust protocol facilitates timely decision-making, minimizes misunderstandings, and ensures that the audit process itself contributes to the auditee's environmental management system improvement. Without clearly defined protocols, there is a risk of information silos, delayed responses to critical issues, and a general lack of coordination, all of which can undermine the overall effectiveness and credibility of the audit program. The protocol serves as a foundational element for the systematic and organized execution of audits, aligning with the principles of due diligence and professional practice in environmental auditing. Question 9. Consider an organization that has integrated energy efficiency targets into its environmental management system, aiming to reduce its carbon footprint in compliance with evolving national emission standards. An environmental audit program is being designed to assess the effectiveness of these energy efficiency initiatives. Which of the following best describes the primary objective of the audit program in this context, as per the principles outlined in ISO 14013-2003? Option A. To verify the accuracy of the organization's reported energy consumption data against historical benchmarks and industry best practices. Option B. To provide assurance that the organization's processes for managing energy efficiency are effective and conform to its stated environmental objectives and relevant regulatory requirements. Option C. To directly identify and quantify specific energy-saving opportunities and recommend immediate operational changes to reduce consumption. Option D. To evaluate the financial return on investment for all energy-saving technologies implemented by the organization in the past fiscal year. The correct answer is B. To provide assurance that the organization's processes for managing energy efficiency are effective and conform to its stated environmental objectives and relevant regulatory requirements. Explanation. The core principle of an audit program under ISO 14013-2003 is to establish a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining audit evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent to which audit criteria are fulfilled. When considering energy efficiency as a focus within an environmental audit program, the objective is not to directly implement energy-saving measures, but to verify the effectiveness of the organization's management system in identifying, monitoring, and achieving energy-related environmental objectives. This involves assessing whether the organization has processes in place to track energy consumption, set targets for reduction, and evaluate the performance of implemented initiatives. The audit program's success in this context is measured by its ability to provide assurance that the organization's energy management practices are aligned with its environmental policy and legal obligations, such as those mandated by regional energy efficiency regulations or national climate action plans. The audit program itself is a management tool, not an operational one. Therefore, its effectiveness is judged by the quality of its planning, execution, and reporting, which in turn informs the organization's continuous improvement of its environmental performance, including energy efficiency. The program's design must ensure that it can assess the competence of auditors, the scope and methodology of audits, and the follow-up actions to ensure that identified nonconformities are addressed, thereby contributing to the overall credibility and utility of the environmental management system. Question 10. Consider an environmental auditor conducting a site visit at a facility processing recycled metals. During the audit, the auditor observes a batch of mixed electronic waste being placed directly into a general industrial waste bin, rather than being directed to a designated e-waste processing stream, as outlined in the company's documented environmental procedures and the National Hazardous Waste Directive. What is the most appropriate method for the auditor to document this observation as a potential finding within the audit program, according to the principles of ISO 14013-2003? Option A. Immediately inform the site manager of a confirmed nonconformity based on the observation, without further documentation or verification of the specific procedural breach. Option B. Note the observation as a general area for improvement without specific reference to procedures or regulations, to avoid prematurely labeling it as a nonconformity. Option C. Document the observation as a minor deviation, focusing solely on the visual aspect of the waste placement without cross-referencing it to internal procedures or external legal requirements. Option D. Record the observation as a potential nonconformity, detailing the specific practice, the relevant company procedure, and the applicable regulatory clause, along with the date and time of the observation. The correct answer is D. Record the observation as a potential nonconformity, detailing the specific practice, the relevant company procedure, and the applicable regulatory clause, along with the date and time of the observation. Explanation. The question pertains to the observation of practices within an environmental audit program as guided by ISO 14013-2003. Specifically, it focuses on how an auditor should document findings related to potential nonconformities observed during site visits. ISO 14013-2003 emphasizes the importance of objective evidence for audit findings. When an auditor observes a practice that deviates from established procedures or regulatory requirements, such as the improper segregation of hazardous waste in a chemical manufacturing facility. This observation must be meticulously recorded. The documentation should include a clear description of the observed practice, the specific clause or requirement it potentially contravenes, e.g., a specific section of the facility's Environmental Management System manual or a relevant clause in the National Environmental Protection Act concerning waste management, and the date and time of the observation. This detailed recording ensures that the finding is factual, verifiable, and provides a solid basis for discussion with the auditee and for subsequent corrective actions if a nonconformity is confirmed. The primary goal is to establish a clear link between the observed practice and the established criteria for evaluation. Question 11. When designing an environmental audit program in accordance with ISO 14013-2003, what fundamental aspect of establishing communication procedures is paramount for ensuring stakeholder engagement and the effective implementation of audit findings, particularly concerning the disclosure of audit scope and methodologies to the auditee prior to the audit commencement? Option A. Developing a comprehensive stakeholder communication matrix that outlines reporting lines, information flow, and feedback mechanisms for all parties involved, including the auditee, auditors, and relevant regulatory bodies. Option B. Prioritizing the dissemination of audit results to external environmental agencies before confirming the findings with the auditee's management team. Option C. Implementing a formal notification system that solely focuses on the final audit report distribution, without prior engagement on the audit's specific objectives or the techniques to be employed. Option D. Relying on informal verbal briefings between the lead auditor and auditee representative to convey the audit's purpose and scope, without any documented communication. The correct answer is A. Developing a comprehensive stakeholder communication matrix that outlines reporting lines, information flow, and feedback mechanisms for all parties involved, including the auditee, auditors, and relevant regulatory bodies. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, specifically in its guidance on establishing audit programs, emphasizes the critical role of clear and effective communication procedures. These procedures are not merely about disseminating information, but about ensuring that all stakeholders understand the purpose, scope, and outcomes of the audit process. Establishing robust communication protocols involves identifying key stakeholders, defining the information to be communicated, determining the frequency and methods of communication, and assigning responsibilities for each communication activity. For an environmental auditing program, this means clearly communicating the audit plan to the auditee, informing relevant regulatory bodies if required by law or the audit scope, and providing timely feedback on audit findings and recommendations to the auditee's management. The goal is to foster transparency, facilitate cooperation, and ensure that the audit contributes to the improvement of the auditee's environmental management system. Without well-defined procedures, misunderstandings can arise, leading to resistance from the auditee, inaccurate reporting, and ultimately, a less effective audit. Therefore, the establishment of these procedures is a foundational element for the successful execution of any environmental audit program, ensuring alignment with organizational objectives and regulatory compliance, such as those mandated by environmental protection agencies. Question 12. Considering a hypothetical chemical manufacturing plant specializing in the synthesis of novel organic compounds and operating under stringent national environmental regulations similar to the European Union's REACH, registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals framework, which of the following represents the most significant environmental risk that an audit program, guided by ISO 14013-2003, should prioritize for identification and assessment? Option A. The occasional need for external consultants to verify the accuracy of energy consumption data reported in annual sustainability disclosures. Option B. The potential for fugitive emissions of volatile organic compounds, VOC, from aging reactor seals and transfer lines due to the inherent volatility and ecotoxicity of several key reaction intermediates. Option C. The possibility of minor aesthetic damage to surrounding vegetation from infrequent, low-volume spills of non-hazardous cleaning solvents during routine equipment maintenance. Option D. The logistical challenge of sourcing alternative raw materials should a single supplier experience a temporary disruption in their production schedule. Correct answer is B. The potential for fugitive emissions of volatile organic compounds, VOC, from aging reactor seals and transfer lines due to the inherent volatility and ecotoxicity of several key reaction intermediates. Explanation: ISO 14013, 2003, Guidelines for Environmental Auditing audit programs emphasizes the proactive identification of environmental risks as a cornerstone of effective environmental management. This involves a systematic process of recognizing potential environmental aspects that could lead to adverse impacts. When considering a manufacturing facility that utilizes a complex chemical synthesis process, a primary environmental risk would stem from the potential for uncontrolled release of hazardous substances. This risk is directly linked to the inherent properties of the chemicals involved, the operational procedures, and the integrity of containment systems. For instance, if a key intermediate is volatile and toxic, and the reaction vessel has a history of minor seal failures, the risk of accidental atmospheric emission is significant. Such an identification process requires an understanding of the specific materials handled, the process flow, potential failure modes of equipment, and the regulatory framework governing emissions, such as the Clean Air Act in the United States or similar national legislation elsewhere. The audit program's role is to ensure that the organization has robust procedures in place to identify, assess, and control these risks, thereby preventing or minimizing environmental harm. This proactive approach is crucial for compliance and for maintaining a sustainable operational footprint. Question 13. Within the framework of ISO 14013-2003, which organizational entity or role is primarily accountable for the strategic direction, resource allocation, and overall effectiveness of the entire environmental auditing program, ensuring its alignment with the organization's environmental policy and legal compliance obligations, such as those mandated by national environmental protection agencies? Option A. The Environmental Compliance Officer responsible for interpreting and applying specific environmental legislation. Option B. The Individual Environmental Audit Program Manager responsible for day-to-day operational planning. Option C. The lead auditor assigned to a specific audit within the program's schedule. Option D. A designated senior management representative or a committee overseeing environmental management systems. Correct answer is D. A designated senior management representative or a committee overseeing environmental management systems. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, concerning guidelines for environmental auditing, specifically addresses the establishment and management of audit programs. A critical element within this framework is the clear assignment of responsibilities for various audit-related activities. In considering the overall management and oversight of an audit program, the responsibility for ensuring the program's effectiveness, adherence to its objectives, and the proper allocation of resources typically rests with a designated senior management function or a specific committee. This function is accountable for the strategic direction and performance of the audit program, ensuring it aligns with the organization's environmental policy and legal obligations, while individual auditors are responsible for conducting specific audits, and the audit team leader for managing individual audit execution. The ultimate programmatic oversight and accountability for the entire audit program's success and continuous improvement falls to a higher organizational authority. This authority ensures that the program is integrated into the organization's management system and contributes to achieving environmental objectives, potentially including compliance with regulations like the European Union's Emissions Trading System, EU ETS, or National Environmental Protection Acts. The program manager role is crucial for operational execution, but the overarching strategic responsibility for the program's existence and effectiveness is usually vested at a more senior level. Question 14. An organization proposes a significant expansion of its industrial facilities into an adjacent area identified as a potential habitat for a rare migratory bird species, a fact noted in local environmental impact assessments and protected species inventories mandated by national wildlife protection laws. In developing its environmental audit program under ISO 14013, 2003. What specific forward-looking element is crucial for ensuring the program adequately addresses the potential impacts of this land use change on biodiversity? Option A. Delegating the responsibility for assessing biodiversity impacts solely to the operational management team, with the audit program only confirming that such assessments have been conducted. Option B. Incorporating periodic reviews of the audit program's effectiveness in identifying and assessing potential biodiversity impacts arising from proposed land use modifications and the adequacy of mitigation measures. Option C. Limiting the audit program's scope to the financial implications of potential fines for non-compliance with environmental regulations concerning land use, without assessing ecological consequences. Option D. Focusing the audit program exclusively on verifying current operational compliance with existing environmental permits and discharge limits related to the current facility footprint. The correct answer is B. Incorporating periodic reviews of the audit program's effectiveness in identifying and assessing potential biodiversity impacts arising from proposed land use modifications and the adequacy of mitigation measures. Explanation. The effectiveness of an environmental audit program, particularly concerning land use and biodiversity, hinges on its ability to proactively identify potential impacts and ensure compliance with relevant regulations. ISO 14013-2003, while a guideline for audit programs, emphasizes the need for such programs to be systematic, independent, and documented to provide reliable and impartial assurance. When considering land use changes that might affect biodiversity, an audit program must incorporate mechanisms for evaluating the potential consequences of proposed activities against established environmental legislation and conservation objectives. This involves not just checking for adherence to permits, but also assessing the broader ecological implications. A program that focuses solely on current operational compliance without forward-looking impact assessment or consideration of cumulative effects would be deficient. The key is to integrate an understanding of the environmental context, including sensitive habitats and species, into the audit planning and execution. This allows for the identification of risks and opportunities related to land use and biodiversity conservation, thereby contributing to the overall environmental performance of the organization. A robust audit program would therefore include provisions for reviewing land use plans, assessing the adequacy of biodiversity protection measures, and verifying compliance with national and international biodiversity commitments, such as those stemming from the Convention on Biological Diversity, where applicable. Question 15. An environmental auditor is reviewing an organization's audit program for compliance with ISO 14013-2003, specifically concerning the integration of emergency preparedness into the environmental management system. The organization recently experienced a minor chemical spill that was contained quickly, but highlighted a lack of clear communication protocols between the on-site response team and the local regulatory authority. Based on the principles of ISO 14013-2003 for auditing audit programs, which of the following audit findings would be most critical in assessing the program's effectiveness in addressing this deficiency? Option A. The audit program recommended a general training session for all personnel on emergency awareness, without specifying enhancements to the communication protocols for critical incidents. Option B. The audit program includes a specific objective to evaluate the effectiveness of the organization's communication procedures during environmental emergencies, and has scheduled follow-up audits to verify corrective actions related to interagency communication. Option C. The audit program identified the spill incident as a non-conformity within the environmental management system, but did not mandate a review of the emergency response plan itself. Option D. The audit program scope was limited to the internal operational procedures of the spill response team, excluding external stakeholder engagement during emergencies. The correct answer is B. The audit program includes a specific objective to evaluate the effectiveness of the organization's communication procedures during environmental emergencies, and has scheduled follow-up audits to verify corrective actions related to interagency communication. Explanation. ISO 14013-2003, while not directly dictating specific emergency response procedures, provides a framework for auditing environmental management systems, including their preparedness for and response to environmental emergencies. An effective audit program under this standard would assess the integration of emergency preparedness into the overall environmental management system. This involves evaluating whether the organization has identified potential environmental emergencies, developed and implemented response plans, and conducted drills or exercises to test these plans. The audit would also examine the communication channels established for emergency situations, both internal and external, and the mechanisms for reviewing and improving emergency response capabilities based on lessons learned from incidents or exercises. Furthermore, the audit would verify that the organization's emergency preparedness aligns with relevant legal and regulatory requirements, such as those pertaining to hazardous substance releases or industrial accidents, and that these requirements are incorporated into the audit criteria. The focus is on the systematic review of the management system's effectiveness in preventing, mitigating, and responding to environmental emergencies. Question 16. When designing an environmental audit program for a manufacturing facility that processes industrial chemicals, which of the following best reflects the foundational step in ensuring the program effectively addresses the organization's environmental performance against its commitments and legal mandates? Option A. Establishing a detailed schedule for conducting internal audits across all departments, irrespective of their direct environmental impact. Option B. Prioritizing the audit of financial records to assess the cost-effectiveness of environmental management initiatives. Option C. Comprehensive identification and systematic categorization of all applicable legal requirements, permits, and voluntary commitments relevant to the facility's operations and environmental aspects. Option D. Focusing solely on the organization's stated environmental policy without cross-referencing external regulatory frameworks. The correct answer is C. Comprehensive identification and systematic categorization of all applicable legal requirements, permits, and voluntary commitments relevant to the facility's operations and environmental aspects. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, while focusing on audit programs, implicitly requires an understanding of how an organization's compliance obligations are identified and managed to inform the audit scope and objectives. Compliance obligations encompass legal requirements, permits, and other conditions to which an organization subscribes. When developing an audit program, an auditor must consider the organization's environmental policy, objectives, and the specific regulatory landscape in which it operates. This includes national environmental protection acts, regional discharge limits, and industry-specific regulations. The audit program should then be structured to verify adherence to these identified obligations. For instance, if a facility operates under a permit that specifies a maximum allowable emission limit for sulfur dioxide, the audit program would need to include procedures for verifying that the facility's monitoring and reporting systems accurately reflect actual emissions, and that these emissions remain within the permitted threshold. This verification might involve reviewing monitoring data, calibration records for measurement equipment, and reporting formats submitted to regulatory bodies. The identification and categorization of these obligations are foundational to determining the audit's focus, the criteria against which performance will be measured, and the resources required for effective execution. An audit program's effectiveness hinges on its ability to systematically address the most significant compliance obligations relevant to the organization's environmental aspects. Question 17. When developing an audit program under ISO 14013-2003, what fundamental principle guides the integration of environmental risk monitoring to ensure the program remains responsive to potential environmental impacts and regulatory shifts? Option A. The audit program should incorporate mechanisms to track changes in environmental legislation and operational activities, using this data to dynamically adjust audit scope and focus areas. Option B. Environmental risk monitoring should be conducted independently of the audit program to avoid bias in the assessment of audit findings. Option C. The audit program should exclusively focus on compliance with existing environmental permits, as this inherently covers all significant environmental risks. Option D. The audit program's primary function is to document historical environmental performance, with risk monitoring serving as a secondary consideration for future program development. The correct answer is A. The audit program should incorporate mechanisms to track changes in environmental legislation and operational activities, using this data to dynamically adjust audit scope and focus areas. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, in its guidelines for environmental auditing, emphasizes the proactive identification and management of environmental risks within an audit program. Monitoring environmental risks is a continuous process that underpins the effectiveness of the audit program by ensuring that emerging or changing risks are captured and addressed. This involves establishing a systematic approach to track potential environmental impacts and the effectiveness of controls. The guideline suggests that the audit program should facilitate the identification of significant environmental aspects and associated risks, and the monitoring process should feed back into the program's design and execution. For instance, if a new regulatory requirement concerning volatile organic compound emissions is introduced, the audit program needs to be adjusted to include specific checks for compliance with this new regulation, thereby monitoring the associated environmental risk. The effectiveness of this monitoring is judged by its ability to provide timely information for decision-making regarding the scope, frequency, and intensity of audits. It's not merely about finding nonconformities, but about anticipating and mitigating potential environmental harm by understanding the evolving risk landscape. This aligns with the principle of continuous improvement within environmental management systems. Question 18. Ethereal Dynamics, a firm manufacturing advanced aerospace components, operates under the stringent Clean Air Act of Viridia, which mandates strict control over particulate emissions and volatile organic compounds. The company has established an internal environmental policy committed to minimizing its ecological footprint. When designing its comprehensive environmental auditing program in accordance with ISO 14013-2003, which of the following represents the most foundational and critical objective to be defined? Option A: to identify opportunities for cost savings through the optimization of resource utilization and waste reduction initiatives. Option B: to enhance the perception of Ethereal Dynamics as an environmentally responsible corporate citizen among its stakeholders. Option C: to verify the organization's compliance with the Clean Air Act of Viridia and its own environmental policy commitments. Option D: to foster a culture of environmental awareness and continuous improvement among all employees within the organization. The correct answer is C: to verify the organization's compliance with the Clean Air Act of Viridia and its own environmental policy commitments. Explanation: the establishment of clear and measurable objectives for an environmental auditing program is fundamental to its effectiveness and alignment with the organization's overall environmental policy and legal obligations. ISO 14013-2003, while providing guidance on audit programs, emphasizes that the objectives should be derived from the organization's strategic environmental goals and regulatory landscape. For a manufacturing firm like Ethereal Dynamics, which produces specialized components and is subject to stringent emissions regulations under the hypothetical Clean Air Act of Viridia, the primary driver for an audit program would be to ensure ongoing compliance and identify areas for environmental performance improvement. Therefore, the most critical objective is to verify adherence to these specific legal requirements and internal environmental standards. Other objectives, such as enhancing stakeholder confidence or reducing operational costs, are important outcomes, but are secondary to the foundational need to meet legal mandates and internal policies. The program's success is measured by its ability to confirm that the organization's environmental management system effectively controls its impacts and meets its obligations, thereby supporting sustainable operations and avoiding potential penalties. Question 19. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 14013-2003 for developing an environmental audit program, what is the most crucial element for ensuring the program's effective implementation and the acceptance of its findings by the auditee and relevant stakeholders, particularly in the context of adhering to national environmental protection regulations? Option A: documenting all audit procedures and findings in extensive detail, irrespective of stakeholder engagement. Option B: establishing a robust framework for continuous two-way communication and proactive consultation with all identified stakeholders throughout the audit lifecycle. Option C: primarily focusing on the technical expertise of the audit team in identifying noncompliance with specific environmental statutes. Option D. Limiting communication to formal reporting after the audit is completed to maintain audit objectivity. The correct answer is B. Establishing a robust framework for continuous two-way communication and proactive consultation with all identified stakeholders throughout the audit lifecycle. Explanation: ISO 14013, 2003, in its guidance on audit programs, emphasizes the critical role of effective communication and consultation throughout the auditing process. This standard, while not a certification standard itself, provides a framework for developing and managing environmental audit programs. Section 4.3, concerning the management of the audit program, highlights that successful program implementation hinges on clear communication channels. This includes informing relevant stakeholders about the audit's objectives, scope, and methodologies. Consultation is also vital, involving dialogue with auditees and other interested parties to ensure the audit's relevance and to facilitate the collection of accurate information. The standard implicitly advocates for a proactive approach to communication, addressing potential misunderstandings or resistance before they impede the audit's progress. For instance, early consultation can help align the audit's focus with the organization's current environmental priorities and regulatory compliance efforts, such as those mandated by national environmental protection acts or regional emission standards. The effectiveness of an audit program is directly linked to the quality of these interactions, ensuring that findings are understood and actionable. Therefore, a well-structured audit program will incorporate specific mechanisms for ongoing communication and consultation with all parties involved, from the audit team to the audited entity, and potentially external regulatory bodies or community representatives if the scope dictates. This ensures transparency and fosters a collaborative environment, which is crucial for achieving the audit's intended outcomes and promoting continuous environmental improvement. Question 20. Consider an organization that has established a comprehensive environmental audit program in accordance with the principles outlined in ISO 14013-2003. The program's effectiveness is contingent upon the ongoing proficiency of its audit team. What is the most fundamental strategic approach that the program management should adopt to ensure the sustained competence of its environmental auditors, particularly in light of evolving environmental legislation and auditing techniques? Option A. Rely solely on the auditor's prior experience and ad hoc participation in industry conferences to maintain their skill sets. Option B. Focus primarily on the number of audits conducted by each auditor, assuming that increased practical experience inherently leads to maintained competence. Option C. Mandate that auditors pursue advanced academic degrees in environmental science or law as a prerequisite for continued participation in the audit program. Option D. Implement a structured, continuous professional development plan that includes regular training on emerging environmental regulations, advancements in auditing methodologies, and sector-specific environmental challenges. Correct answer is D. Implement a structured, continuous professional development plan that includes regular training on emerging environmental regulations, advancements in auditing methodologies, and sector-specific environmental challenges. Explanation: ISO 14013, 2003, while not a mandatory standard, provides guidelines for establishing and managing environmental auditing programs. A critical aspect of such programs, as implied by the need for effective auditing, is maintaining the competence of auditors. This involves ensuring that auditors possess the necessary knowledge, skills, and experience to conduct audits effectively and impartially. Maintaining competence is not a one-time event but an ongoing process. It typically involves a combination of initial training, continuous professional development, and practical experience. For an audit program to be considered robust and aligned with best practices, the management responsible for the program must implement mechanisms to monitor and enhance auditor competence. This includes identifying training needs, providing opportunities for skill development, e.g., workshops on new environmental regulations, changes in auditing methodologies, or specific industry sectors, and ensuring auditors stay current with relevant legislation and scientific advancements. The goal is to equip auditors to identify potential environmental nonconformities, assess the effectiveness of an organization's environmental management system, and provide valuable insights for improvement, all while adhering to the principles of impartiality and objectivity. Question 21. Consider an industrial facility that discharges treated wastewater into a local river. An environmental audit program is in place to assess the effectiveness of its water pollution prevention measures. Which of the following best represents a key performance indicator for the audit program's success in this specific context, as aligned with the principles of ISO 14013-2003? Option A. Percentage of audit team members who possess certifications in water chemistry analysis, indicating technical expertise. Option B. The number of internal environmental audit reports generated by the program over a fiscal year, irrespective of the findings or corrective actions taken. Option C. The total volume of water consumed by the facility during the audit period as a measure of water resource efficiency. Option D. The audit program's documented ability to identify and facilitate the resolution of nonconformities related to wastewater discharge parameters, ensuring compliance with the local Environmental Protection Agency's effluent standards. The correct answer is D. The audit program's documented ability to identify and facilitate the resolution of nonconformities related to wastewater discharge parameters, ensuring compliance with the local Environmental Protection Agency's effluent standards. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, while providing guidelines for environmental auditing and audit programs, does not prescribe specific numerical thresholds for water pollutant concentrations. Instead, it focuses on the process and framework for establishing and managing such programs. The effectiveness of an environmental audit program, particularly concerning water pollution prevention, is assessed by its ability to ensure compliance with relevant legislation, identify areas for improvement, and verify the implementation of environmental management systems. When evaluating the performance of an audit program against water pollution prevention objectives, an auditor would consider the systematic review of the organization's processes for managing wastewater discharge. This involves examining whether the program includes provisions for assessing the adequacy of monitoring procedures, the effectiveness of pollution control technologies, and the alignment of operational practices with national and local water quality regulations, such as those stipulated by the Clean Water Act in the United States or equivalent regional directives. The program's success is measured by its capacity to detect non-compliance, facilitate corrective actions, and contribute to the overall reduction of pollutants entering water bodies. Therefore, the most direct indicator of an audit program's effectiveness in water pollution prevention is its demonstrated success in ensuring adherence to legal requirements and driving tangible improvements in the organization's environmental performance related to water. Question 22. When establishing the frequency and requisite resources for an environmental audit program under ISO 14013-2003, which overarching principle should guide the decision-making process to ensure optimal effectiveness and resource utilization? Option A. A strategy that prioritizes audits of departments with the highest historical audit findings, regardless of current risk levels or regulatory relevance. Option B. A reactive approach that primarily allocates resources based on the number of environmental incidents reported in the preceding year. Option C. A fixed, cyclical schedule based solely on the organization's size and the number of operational departments, irrespective of performance. Option D. A dynamic risk-based methodology that continuously evaluates environmental aspects, potential impacts, system maturity, and regulatory changes. The correct answer is D. A dynamic risk-based methodology that continuously evaluates environmental aspects, potential impacts, system maturity, and regulatory changes. Explanation: the determination of audit frequency and the allocation of resources for an environmental auditing program, as guided by ISO 14013-2003, necessitates a comprehensive risk-based approach. This involves a thorough evaluation of several critical factors to ensure the program's effectiveness and efficiency. Key considerations include the significance of environmental aspects identified within the organization, the potential impact of nonconformities on the environment, and the organization's legal compliance, the historical performance of audited processes or systems, and the evolving regulatory landscape, such as new or amended environmental legislation. Furthermore, the maturity and effectiveness of the organization's existing environmental management system play a crucial role. A more robust and well-established system might permit less frequent, but still targeted audits, while a newer or less effective system would warrant more frequent scrutiny. The availability of qualified auditors and the overall complexity of the operations being audited are also integral to resource allocation. Therefore, a proactive strategy that continuously assesses these variables will lead to a more dynamic and responsive audit program, optimizing resource deployment, and maximizing the identification and mitigation of environmental risks. Question 23. When developing audit checklists and protocols for an environmental management system audit, a key consideration for ensuring comprehensive coverage and adherence to the organization's environmental policy and applicable regulations, such as the EU's Industrial Emissions Directive, WIDE, or the U.S. Clean Air Act, is the selection of appropriate audit criteria. Which of the following best describes the primary function of these selected criteria in the context of checklist and protocol development for an environmental audit program? Option A. To provide a historical overview of the organization's environmental performance trends over the past decade, used solely for benchmarking against industry best practices. Option B. To serve as the benchmark against which evidence of conformity or nonconformity with the environmental management system and relevant legal obligations is evaluated during the audit. Option C. To define the organizational structure and reporting lines of the environmental department being audited, focusing on accountability for environmental performance. Option D. To dictate the specific sampling methodology and statistical analysis techniques that must be employed by the audit team to validate findings. Correct answer is B. To serve as the benchmark against which evidence of conformity or nonconformity with the environmental management system and relevant legal obligations is evaluated during the audit. Explanation: ISO 14013, 2003, which provides guidelines for environmental auditing, emphasizes the importance of well-structured audit programs. A critical component of establishing an effective audit program is the preparation of audit checklists and protocols. These documents serve as the backbone of the audit process, ensuring that all relevant aspects of the environmental management system are systematically examined against defined criteria, which may include legal requirements, organizational policies, and the ISO 14001 standard itself. The development of these tools requires a thorough understanding of the audit objectives, the scope of the audit, and the specific environmental aspects and impacts pertinent to the auditee's operations. A robust checklist or protocol will incorporate questions that elicit evidence of compliance, effectiveness, and efficiency of the environmental management system. It should also be flexible enough to allow auditors to pursue emergent issues or areas of concern identified during the audit. The selection of audit criteria is paramount. These are the reference points against which audit findings are evaluated. For an environmental audit, these criteria typically encompass applicable environmental legislation, permits, licenses, internal procedures, and the organization's own environmental policy and objectives. The process of developing these tools is iterative and should involve input from individuals with appropriate knowledge of both auditing principles and the auditee's industry and regulatory landscape. The goal is to create a tool that guides the audit process efficiently, while ensuring comprehensive coverage of the audit scope and objectives, thereby facilitating the identification of nonconformities and opportunities for improvement. Question 24. A multinational manufacturing firm, TerraCycle Industries, is undergoing an external environmental audit to assess its compliance with national environmental protection regulations and its own internal environmental management system. The audit team, led by Auditor Anya Sharma, discovers a significant discrepancy in the waste disposal records for a particular chemical byproduct. The internal records suggest a lower volume of hazardous waste disposal than what is indicated by the disposal contractor's manifest, which was also reviewed by the team. The discrepancy, if not properly addressed, could lead to misrepresentation of the company's environmental performance and potential regulatory noncompliance. Considering the fundamental principles of environmental auditing, which of the following actions by Auditor Sharma would best uphold these principles in this scenario? Option A. Ensure the audit report accurately documents the discrepancy, presenting both the internal records and the contractor's manifest, and clearly stating the implications for compliance and environmental performance, while maintaining impartiality and confidentiality of sensitive information. Option B, immediately escalate the discrepancy to the Environmental Regulatory Authority without further internal verification or discussion with TerraCycle Industries management to ensure immediate action is taken. Option C, include a general statement in the audit report about potential record-keeping issues without specifying the exact nature of the discrepancy or its potential impact, to avoid creating unnecessary alarm among stakeholders. Option D, focus the audit report solely on the internal records provided by TerraCycle Industries, assuming they are more accurate, and deferring the contractor's manifest as potentially erroneous without further investigation. Correct answer is A. Ensure the audit report accurately documents the discrepancy, presenting both the internal records and the contractor's manifest, and clearly stating the implications for compliance and environmental performance, while maintaining impartiality and confidentiality of sensitive information. Explanation: the principles of environmental auditing, as outlined in ISO 14013-2003, provide the foundational framework for conducting effective and credible audits. These principles are crucial for ensuring that audits are conducted impartially and systematically, leading to reliable findings and conclusions. One of the core principles is the integrity of the auditor and the audit process. This means that auditors must act honestly and ethically, and the audit itself must be conducted in a manner that is free from bias or undue influence. Another key principle is fair presentation, which mandates that audit findings, conclusions, and reports accurately reflect the audit objectives and scope. This implies that the audit information presented must be truthful, precise, and complete without exaggeration or omission. Furthermore, due professional care is essential, requiring auditors to exercise diligence and skill in accordance with the importance of the task they are performing and the confidence placed in them by clients and stakeholders. This principle emphasizes the need for competence, objectivity, and a systematic approach. Finally, confidentiality is paramount, ensuring that information gained during the audit is protected and not disclosed to unauthorized parties without specific authority, unless there is a legal or professional right or duty to disclose. Adherence to these principles ensures that environmental audits serve their intended purpose of providing valuable insights for environmental management improvement. Question 25. Consider an environmental audit program designed to assess an industrial facility's compliance with national regulations concerning the treatment and disposal of hazardous chemical waste. The facility utilizes a multi-stage chemical precipitation process followed by dewatering and stabilization before landfilling. According to the principles outlined in ISO 14013-2003 for audit programs, what is the primary focus of the audit team when evaluating the effectiveness of this waste treatment component within the overall audit program? Option A. Detailed technical review of the chemical reactions occurring during precipitation to ensure optimal process kinetics and yield. Option B. Assessment of the cost efficiency of the chemical precipitation agents and dewatering equipment compared to alternative waste minimization strategies. Option C. Examination of the facility's internal policies on employee training for operating the stabilization machinery, irrespective of external regulatory requirements. Option D. Verification that the chosen waste treatment process consistently achieves the legally mandated reduction in hazardous constituents and that disposal methods align with regulatory permits. Correct answer is D. Verification that the chosen waste treatment process consistently achieves the legally mandated reduction in hazardous constituents and that disposal methods align with regulatory permits. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, while providing guidelines for environmental auditing, does not prescribe specific waste treatment methodologies or their legal compliance verification in detail. Instead, it focuses on the audit process itself. When an audit program is designed to assess compliance with waste treatment regulations, the auditor's role is to verify that the organization's practices align with the requirements of applicable laws and permits. For instance, if a local regulation mandates that all industrial wastewater sludge must be treated to reduce hazardous constituents by a specific percentage before disposal, the audit would examine the organization's treatment process records, laboratory analysis of the sludge, and disposal manifests to confirm adherence. The audit program's effectiveness in this context is measured by its ability to identify any deviations from these legal requirements. The auditor would look for evidence that the chosen treatment method is capable of achieving the legally stipulated reduction, that it is being operated correctly, and that the resulting treated sludge meets the criteria for its intended disposal route, such as landfilling or incineration, as defined by environmental protection agencies. The program must ensure that the audit scope covers the entire waste stream lifecycle, from generation to final disposal, with a specific focus on the treatment stages and their regulatory conformity. Question 26. When developing an environmental auditing program in accordance with ISO 14013-2003, which foundational element is paramount for ensuring clarity, efficiency, and stakeholder alignment throughout the audit lifecycle, from planning to reporting, particularly when considering diverse organizational structures and regulatory reporting requirements under frameworks like the European Pollutant Release and Transfer Register, EPRTR. Option A. A meticulously defined communication protocol outlining reporting lines, information flow, and feedback mechanisms for all audit-related interactions. Option B. The exclusive use of digital platforms for all audit documentation and data exchange to maximize record-keeping efficiency. Option C. The immediate dissemination of all preliminary audit findings to external regulatory bodies for proactive compliance verification. Option D. The delegation of all communication responsibilities to a single, designated audit team leader without input from Audit management. The correct answer is A. A meticulously defined communication protocol outlining reporting lines, information flow, and feedback mechanisms for all audit-related interactions. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, while not a mandatory standard like ISO 14001, provides essential guidance for establishing effective environmental auditing programs. A critical component of any audit program is the establishment of clear and efficient communication protocols. These protocols are designed to ensure that all stakeholders involved in the audit process are informed, understand their roles, and can provide necessary input or receive relevant findings. The standard emphasizes that communication should be timely, accurate, and appropriate for the audience. This involves defining who communicates what, to whom, when, and through which channels. For instance, initial audit planning requires communication with auditees to schedule activities and gather preliminary information. During the audit, communication is crucial for clarifying findings, addressing concerns, and ensuring the audit team has access to necessary personnel and documentation. Post-audit, communication of the audit report and any corrective action plans is vital for the effective closure of the audit process and for driving continuous improvement. Establishing these protocols in advance minimizes misunderstandings, enhances cooperation, and ultimately contributes to the overall effectiveness and credibility of the environmental auditing program. The development of a communication plan is a proactive step that addresses potential challenges and ensures a smooth audit execution, aligning with the principles of good governance and transparency in environmental management. Question 27. When developing an audit program for a multinational chemical manufacturing company with operations in several countries subject to differing environmental regulations, such as the European Union's REACH registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals, and the United States TSCA, Toxic Substances Control Act, what is the most crucial aspect of establishing communication procedures to ensure the audit program's effectiveness and compliance across all jurisdictions? Option A. Implementing a tiered communication protocol that clearly defines reporting lines for audit progress, findings, and corrective action plans, differentiating between site-level management, regional environmental compliance officers, and corporate sustainability leadership, while also accounting for distinct national regulatory reporting requirements. Option B. Establishing a single point of contact within the audit program for all external regulatory agencies to streamline inquiries and ensure consistent messaging, even if this consolidates communication away from internal operational experts. Option C. Relying solely on digital communication platforms for all audit-related correspondence to maximize efficiency and minimize the environmental footprint associated with traditional mail or fax transmissions. Option D. Standardizing all communication channels and documentation formats across all global sites to ensure a uniform approach to information dissemination, regardless of local operational nuances or specific regulatory mandates. correct answer is A. Implementing a tiered communication protocol that clearly defines reporting lines for audit progress, findings, and corrective action plans, differentiating between site-level management, regional environmental compliance officers, and corporate sustainability leadership, while also accounting for distinct national regulatory reporting requirements. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, specifically in its guidance on audit programs, emphasizes the critical role of effective communication procedures. These procedures are not merely about transmitting information, but about ensuring clarity, timeliness, and appropriate channels for all parties involved in the environmental auditing process. Establishing these procedures requires careful consideration of the audit scope, objectives, and the specific context of the organization being audited. Key elements include defining who communicates what, to whom, when, and through which medium. This ensures that all stakeholders, from the audit organization's management to the audit team members and potentially external regulatory bodies, are kept informed of audit progress, findings, and any necessary actions. The goal is to foster a transparent and collaborative environment that supports the audit's effectiveness and facilitates the implementation of any recommended improvements. A robust communication plan, integral to the audit program, helps mitigate misunderstandings, manage expectations, and ensure that the audit process itself does not become a hindrance to operational efficiency or environmental performance. It aligns with the broader principles of environmental management systems, promoting continuous improvement through informed decision-making. Question 28. A manufacturing facility, operating under stringent national environmental regulations concerning volatile organic compound (VOC) emissions, is developing its environmental audit program as per ISO 14013-2003 guidelines. The organization has identified a potential risk of exceeding permitted VOC discharge limits due to aging equipment in its solvent-based coating department. Which aspect of the audit program's design and implementation is most critical for effectively controlling this identified environmental risk? Option A. Focusing the audit program solely on the review of the environmental policy and its stated commitment to pollution prevention. Option B. Prioritizing audits of the organization's waste management practices, regardless of their direct connection to VOC emissions. Option C. Scheduling audits based on the frequency of employee training sessions on general environmental awareness, without specific reference to operational risks. Option D. Ensuring the audit program includes specific verification procedures for the calibration and maintenance records of the solvent application and ventilation equipment. The correct answer is D. Ensuring the audit program includes specific verification procedures for the calibration and maintenance records of the solvent application and ventilation equipment. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, while focusing on audit programs, implicitly guides the approach to controlling environmental risks within an organization. The standard emphasizes the establishment, implementation, and maintenance of an audit program that is systematic, independent, and documented. When considering environmental risk control, the audit program serves as a mechanism to verify the effectiveness of existing risk management processes and identify areas for improvement. This involves ensuring that the organization's environmental policy and objectives are being met, and that legal and other requirements are complied with. An effective audit program will assess whether the organization has identified its significant environmental aspects and their associated risks, and if appropriate controls are in place. This includes evaluating the adequacy of operational controls, emergency preparedness, and the competence of personnel involved in environmental management. The program's design should consider the results of previous audits, changes in environmental legislation, such as regulations on hazardous waste disposal or air emissions, and the overall environmental performance of the organization. The goal is to provide management with information to make informed decisions about resource allocation for risk mitigation and to ensure the continuous improvement of the environmental management system. Therefore, the systematic evaluation of an organization's environmental aspects and impacts through a well-structured audit program is a crucial component of controlling environmental risks. Question 29. Consider an environmental audit program established for a multinational chemical manufacturing company operating in regions with varying environmental regulatory frameworks, including specific REACH, registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals, compliance requirements in the European Union, and the Toxic Substances Control Act (TSCA) in the United States. The audit program's objective is to assess the company's adherence to both its internal environmental policies and external legal obligations. According to the principles outlined in ISO 14013-2003 for audit programs, what is the primary consideration when determining the necessary competence and training for the audit team assigned to this complex scenario? Option A. The audit team's familiarity with general quality management principles, irrespective of specific environmental regulatory knowledge. Option B. The audit team's prior experience in conducting financial audits, as this demonstrates a systematic approach to evidence gathering and reporting. Option C. The audit team's proficiency in project management techniques, ensuring the audit is completed within the allocated timeline and budget. Option D. The audit team's ability to demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of the specific environmental legislation applicable to each operating region, coupled with practical skills in evaluating chemical substance management processes and their associated risks. The correct answer is D. The audit team's ability to demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of the specific environmental legislation applicable to each operating region, coupled with practical skills in evaluating chemical substance management processes and their associated risks. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, in its guidelines for environmental auditing, emphasizes the critical role of auditor competence and training in ensuring the effectiveness and credibility of audit programs. The standard outlines that the competence of an audit team and individual auditors is a multifaceted attribute encompassing knowledge, skills, and experience. This competence is not static, but requires continuous development. Specifically, the guidelines highlight that an auditor's knowledge base must include an understanding of relevant environmental legislation and regulations, such as the European Union's Emissions Trading System, EU ETS, or National Pollutant Release and Transfer Registers, PRTR, depending on the scope of the audit. Furthermore, auditors need to possess practical skills in audit methodologies, communication, and problem-solving. Training programs designed to develop this competence should be structured to address these areas. For an audit program to be considered robust and to comply with the spirit of ISO 14013-2003, the selection and ongoing development of auditors must be based on a systematic assessment of their ability to perform audits effectively within the defined scope and objectives. This includes ensuring they can interpret and apply relevant environmental standards and regulatory requirements to the specific context of the organization being audited. The ultimate goal is to build an audit team capable of providing objective and reliable findings that contribute to the improvement of the auditee's environmental management system. Question 30. During an environmental audit of a manufacturing facility, an auditor observes that the documented procedure for managing waste solvent disposal mandates its collection in designated, clearly labeled sealed containers, with a weekly pickup schedule by a certified hazardous waste disposal company. However, the auditor witnesses employees consolidating waste solvent into unlabeled, open-top drums in a general storage area, with no immediate plan for disposal. This observed practice directly contradicts the established environmental management system's procedures and relevant local environmental regulations regarding hazardous waste handling. What is the most appropriate initial classification of this discrepancy from an audit perspective, considering the principles outlined in ISO 14013-2003? Option A. A deviation from best practice, suggesting an opportunity for process optimization in waste consolidation. Option B. A minor observation requiring a recommendation for improved employee training on waste handling protocols. Option C. A significant nonconformity indicating a breakdown in the implementation of the environmental management system and potential regulatory noncompliance. Option D. A potential finding that needs further investigation to determine if it impacts the overall environmental performance. The correct answer is C. A significant nonconformity indicating a breakdown in the implementation of the environmental management system and potential regulatory noncompliance. Explanation: ISO 14013-2003, which provides guidelines for environmental auditing, emphasizes the importance of observing actual practices during an audit to verify the effectiveness of an environmental management system. When an auditor observes a discrepancy between documented procedures and the actual implementation of those procedures, it signifies a potential nonconformity or a weakness in the system. The primary objective of such an observation is to identify whether the environmental policy, objectives, and legal requirements are being met in practice. This observation serves as a critical piece of evidence to assess the actual performance of the organization against its stated environmental commitments and regulatory obligations. For instance, if a documented procedure for spill containment requires the use of specific absorbent materials at designated locations, but an auditor observes that these materials are absent or stored incorrectly, this is a direct deviation from the established norm. Such a finding necessitates further investigation to determine the root cause and potential environmental impact, and it directly informs the auditor's conclusions regarding the system's conformity and effectiveness. The auditor's role is to evaluate the implementation and effectiveness of the environmental management system, and direct observation of practices is a cornerstone of this evaluation, providing objective evidence that complements documentary review. This process is crucial for ensuring that the environmental management system is not merely a theoretical construct, but a functional framework guiding operational activities.